All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. Yes, sir, back on the line, I've got the great Jim Bovard, wrote all those books, including Lost Rights and Freedom in Chains and The Bush Betrayal and Attention Deficit Democracy, and he really is the most accomplished libertarian journalist in our history. And it's cool, too, because he does this sort of, investigative punditry so that he can stay angry while also reporting new original facts and details and journalism as he does. The great Jim Bovard, welcome back to the show, sir. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks, Scott. Thanks very much for your kind words. What, me angry? I'm a nice country boy.
Yeah, there you go. Well, listen, I guess what happens is I read your articles in my voice, and so that's different.
Well, it's... that's fine. I mean, I appreciate you reading them, and I certainly appreciate all the heck you, letting people know about them. So,
well, yeah. I should have mentioned that you're a regular over at the New York Post these days, but you have been doing this a long time. And, I might have told you this story probably off the air only if I did before, Jim, but in the 90s, I thought all of libertarianism was a certain orange magazine that didn't care about anything important at all. And, oh, check us out, dude. We're pretty skeptical about this whole believing in Jesus means you get to live forever thing. Like, yeah, that's really skeptical. But, I figured all that stuff out in third grade. What I'm more interested in is Bill Clinton murdering people in Iraq and murdering people in Waco and at least his agents murdering people in Oklahoma City and his government covering all of that up. And the Gulf War illness and these poor soldiers coming home all poisoned from all different things, apparently, from their time in Iraq War I. And as best as I could tell, libertarians didn't care about stuff like that. And so I was palling around with the Patriot movement because at least they cared about the Branch Davidians. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to agree on the most important things. And what happened to the Branch Davidians is the most important things. And then it turns out what I didn't know was that you, sir, were holding down Waco for the libertarian movement all those years, writing for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm not sure who all else, Playboy magazine, I think. And I just didn't know the name. I did not know that there's this, I did read the Wall Street Journal from time to time, but it just never became, I might have even read a piece of yours or two or something, but it never became a thing that I knew that there's this guy Bovard out there who's really doing great work on this and representing libertarians well. So I didn't really even understand that there were hardcore, like serious hate government, not to put words in your mouth, but willing to fight about very unjust things type libertarians until,
thank you. Yeah.
antiwar.com and LouRockwell.com later on. So, to sell you short, I'm acknowledging that I did that, you were out there and I just didn't know it. But you were, setting a great example for, what libertarianism is supposed to be about. In the same way as Justin Raimondo. I started reading Raimondo. He wasn't writing about libertarianism other than like, come on, libertarians, we're all good on this stuff, right? But the articles were about what the neocons were doing to lie us into war and kill all these people and all these things. It was all this very detailed, fact-based, activist stuff about the real world, about what's really happening and what we really have to oppose. And, you do that same great kind of work and all these years. And so thanks for that. But anyway, enough praising you. The point is that these archives can be found at jimbovard.com. And you have this great archive, Bovard articles on Waco, Ruby Ridge, and gun rights. And that'll be in the show notes here. And it's this collection, Washington Times, Wall Street Journal, Playboy, American Spectator. And these go way, way back, all through from 1994, all through the end of the 1990s. Sticking up for the truth, which is the same thing as sticking up for the Branch Davidians. So really important stuff. And I've been digging through a bit of it. And so I was hoping we could talk about some of the things that you learned, or certainly that you focused on as being, I guess, the most important points back then. Like, for example, the question of how the raid happened and, the ATF's idea of what they were doing there, how it unfolded, and of course, who fired first. Would you like to start with that and address, especially if you could, in context of the time, of how this story, how it was that you first, noticed, the reports of it, or what you thought of it when you started looking at it, or why you thought it was so important, and what you learned about how it all unfolded there?
Okay. Again, thanks very much for your kind words, and it's great to see how you're carrying the flag forward as far as putting out very informative articles and books on the U.S. foreign policy fiascos. I was following Waco. Waco went down at the time I was, busting ass to try to finish up lost rights, the destruction of American liberty, just working around the clock. And I was kind of jolted by the ATF raid, February 28th, 1993. Kind of, holy shit, what's going on there? And then the FBI comes in, and the FBI brings in the tanks. And I have memories, April 19th, 1993, I was getting beaten on the head by editors. Where's the next chapter? And I was just pacing in my living room where the TV in the house was, smoking a cigar, watching the tanks go smashing in again and again and again. And it was like, holy crap, I can't believe they're doing this. I think some of the people in the FBI at headquarters were also surprised at that. But and then, I had some stuff, and it was funny dealing with the book editors. The book was closing up for print around October 93, and I was elbowing. Can we get a couple more paragraphs here on Waco in the chapter on guns, crimes, drugs, and snares? And, they were saying, oh, my God, what do you mean you want to add more? Oh, but this is really good. This is so important. And then later, I was able to find editors who were open to that. David Brooks of the Wall Street Journal was great. He later became a pro-government columnist at the New York Times.
I was going to say David Brooks, as in David Brooks? David Brooks?
David Brooks. And it's interesting because Brooks was only there as the editorial features editor for about a year, and he was probably skeptical of me at first, but then he decided he liked my stuff. I did a piece on Ruby Ridge just after Louis Freeh said that they were not going to file charges against any of the FBI agents involved, and the piece was "No Accountability at the FBI" was the headline, and it talked about how it certainly looked like Vicki Weaver was murdered by the FBI sniper, and the chief of the FBI, Louis Freeh, counterattacked, wrote a long letter to the Wall Street Journal, which they published, and I wrote a response to that. And I appreciate that Brooks didn't throw me under the bus as far as, the FBI attacked him, so we can't publish him anymore. Brooks was very good. I did a couple pieces on Waco for him after that, another piece or two on Ruby Ridge. They were very good at that time. So, but no, it was fascinating to me to see how, first of all, to see how Waco went down, and then to see how the media reacted. Janet Reno became a national hero because she went on, was a Nightline, and said, I take responsibility. But, she also said, but it wasn't my fault. It was all David Koresh's fault for wanting to kill those people, something like that. But there was a stampede by the media to put a halo over her head. And that was part of the general whitewashing of federal law enforcement activity there at Waco. And the first polls showed very high public support for what the FBI had done. And these are the kind of polls that make me skeptical about democracy and humanity. And, but as time went on, as people looked past the pro-government storyline, a lot more Americans became skeptical, and there was a growing push to investigate that. Then along comes April 19th, 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing. It's interesting. I was at a protest at the Justice Department. I was walking around downtown on that morning, and I heard there's going to be a protest by some gun owners and gun rights groups, and at the Justice Department because of Waco anniversary, second anniversary. So I got there, and there was some journalist comes up and says to the chief of the group, "Hey, I heard your boys were behind that bombing in Oklahoma City." And the guy laughed. No, we had nothing to do with it. I think perhaps people at that point didn't realize how serious it was, but people have forgotten how President Clinton used that to demonize any opposition to government and demonize any criticism of government. It's very similar to what the Biden folks have been trying to do for the last 2 years as far as shutting down criticism of the FBI or of the, Biden's entire power grabs. So maybe I should pause and wait for more specific questions since I'm rambling like hell here.
No, it's good. And it's my fault because I asked an overly broad thing in the first place. So we'll get back to who shot first and all that in a second. But I want to pick up on one thing that you said there about the Oklahoma bombing and its relationship to Waco, and especially the way it was made to rationalize and justify Waco after the fact. As though, not that anybody ever said this, but it might as well have been. Essentially, the case was that David Koresh had gone forward in time, him and all of his children too, and had blown up that federal building. And so, of course, it was justified that the FBI would attack them and kill them in justified, righteous retribution for their aggression. When, of course, the Branch Davidians were all dead and couldn't possibly have blown up that building. They didn't have anything to do with that. And even if somebody claimed to do that in their name, the guy who claimed to do that in their name was not a member of their group. He was some Nazi. And that doesn't reflect on them at all, whether, some third party was angry about it. And yet that became such a slogan. Really, this to me is almost the most important part of it, is seeing the way that they really can just almost hypnotize people into saying these certain phrases like, well, the president must have secret information that we don't know about. That was 20 years ago today. Some lady in my cab told me that. Well, the case for war so far is bogus, but we got to be doing it for a reason, so the president must have secret information that we don't know about. The same thing here. You go, man, something opinion about Waco, and they go, oh yeah, well, what about Oklahoma City? It's like someone poked them with a prod or gave them a dog treat or something, and they have to say it every time. What about Oklahoma City? What about Oklahoma City? Well, what about Oklahoma City? Government employee lives matter more than civilian ones? Is that your point? Or what? Yeah, it's wrong when somebody massacres 100 people. That's what about Oklahoma City, right? It's the same about Waco. But instead, it becomes somehow the Branch Davidians' fault. And so whatever happened to them, including gassing and shooting and burning them to death, doesn't count. And there are probably people who are listening to this right now who should admit that that's you. You did that. You said that. What about Oklahoma? When somebody said something correct and righteous in defense of the innocent lives at Waco. Because that's how easy people are to control. You just show them some crap on TV and they'll repeat it. Unprovoked attack in Ukraine. From somebody who thought that Ukraine was a part of Russia the other day.
Well, okay, so to take a step back, you were talking about the tying Oklahoma City to Waco. There was a letter that Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin sent on July 6th, 1995, just before the House hearings on Waco. And he said that federal action at Waco, quote, cannot be understood properly outside the context of Oklahoma City, even though Oklahoma City happened 2 years afterwards, and it was like ex post facto, ex post facto exoneration.
Yep.
And you had President Clinton saying that there was no need for any hearings on Waco because we had an independent panel review what the ATF did there. Yeah, independent, chosen by Bill Clinton's buddies.
Seriously. Well, And so, you know what, I'm going to put that in my notes, and maybe we can get back to that in a minute.
Sure.
The different so-called independent and not independent investigations, the Treasury and Justice reports, and all that, because there are some important aspects to cover about that. But so let's rewind a little bit and just talk about, I don't know, we assume too much about what people know. This was 30 years ago. So can you just describe a little bit about who is this sect? What are they doing out there in, the northeastern outskirts of Waco, Texas, Jim?
Well, it was people in Texas, so you shouldn't have high expectations of them.
Oh man, that's rough.
No, so this is a group that was an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist, and they had been there for decades. At some point, some years before 1993, David Koresh kind of took over the group. He was doing a lot of he had painted himself as a type of religious savior. I think many, if not most, of the people in the group bought into that message, and he was investigated, I think, at least a couple times for allegations of child abuse, and there was not grounds for prosecution on that. That did not stop the feds from later trying to justify killing the children to prevent child abuse. But so what happened? The Branch Davidians, they were outspoken in favor of guns and the Second Amendment. They were also went to a lot of gun shows in Texas and probably elsewhere. Maybe not elsewhere. I don't know what the federal laws were at that point, if they had laws, licenses in other states nearby. But so what happened was there was an ATF agent, July 1992, went to Koresh's gun dealer and asked him whether the Davidians could be violating federal law by converting semi-automatics to full automatic firing without a federal license. The dealer picked up the phone and called David Koresh, and Koresh invited the ATF agent to come and do an inspection of the Branch Davidians' home. I mean, he was trying to settle the issue right there. The ATF agent said no. Instead, they went and launched this massive investigation, and there was a search warrant which they used to justify the preemptive attack on the Davidians. A congressional report said that's application for the search warrant contained an incredible number of false statements. One of the reasons that the ATF said the search was justified because someone had seen a Gun Owners of America video criticizing the ATF at the Branch Davidians' residence.
Yeah, well, sounds like probable cause to me. Or hey, an objective, a reasonable belief. Something. So listen, I mean, it seems strange that, the ATF, they knew already, right, that this guy didn't have fully automatic weapons. He had these Hellfire triggers, right, which is, I guess like the equivalent of a bump stock, something that sort of kind of approximates automatic fire. But they had been shooting with him, right? They knew what he had and didn't have already.
Well, and the thing that's fascinating, and it's, there were so many levels of cover-up on this case. So what happened is the ATF got the search warrant, and then they had, 76 heavily armed agents on a cattle trailer came in and basically attacked the Davidians' home on a Sunday morning without pretext and without warning. But a huge rationale for that was ATF claimed that it wasn't possible to arrest Koresh outside of his house. That quickly was exposed as BS. But what we didn't know until 5 or 6 years later, thanks to federal former lawyer David Hardy and his FOIA request, was that 9 days before the ATF, 76 agents attacked the Davidians' home. Two ATF agents who the Davidians recognized as undercover agents knocked on the Davidians' door and asked David Koresh if he wanted to go target shooting with them. So David Koresh, another guy, joined them, and the four of them went out plinking, and they talked about the Second Amendment and self-defense and stuff like that. So, and if the ATF wanted to, it would have been easy to slap the handcuffs on right there. You've got a gun, you've got two agents, boom. It's a slam dunk. But instead of doing that, they wanted to do their Showtime high-profile raid followed by a couple of TV news crews.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate too that morning when the agent was there and then left, and I guess the news cameraman had told the Branch Davidian postman that this was all going down and this and that, and so the guy went to leave, and I don't know if Koresh called him out like, "Look, I know you're an ATF agent," or whatever, but it was clear between the two of them. And he says, "Good luck, buddy, out there," whatever. That right then, Rodriguez could have said, "Look, man, you should just come with me. We can defuse this whole thing. I'll go ahead and arrest you now. I'll be in trouble later, but we got to keep this raid from happening. Somebody could get hurt." Something like that. And David Koresh could have done the same thing. "You know what, Robert? You should just take me in right now before this thing gets nuts. And then that way your guys can walk in here instead of running in with their guns drawn," kind of thing. Because he could anticipate what was going on. They knew there was a raid coming. This was not going to be men in three-piece suits knocking on the door, so to speak. And so it was a real failure on both of their parts to diffuse this right then, really. Not that really the Davidians had any responsibility for it, but, I don't know. I think it's important too, and I want to nail this down because I knew this anecdote, and I know David Thibodeau told me this, but I want to really verify this. I know that he left with a truck full of guns, but the way I remember learning it was that Paul Fatta had left the morning of the raid, like at 7 a.m. before the raid at 9, with a dually pickup truck with a camper shell and towing a U-Haul trailer full of rifles, both the camper and the bed of the truck and the U-Haul trailer. So this is hundreds of guns, hundreds of rifles. And to me, well, you know what? Give or take the damn U-Haul trailer. Seriously, like even just the truck full. To me, you have either the story of Waco and the Branch Davidians and the raid and all this, or you have the story of the Branch Davidians and the raid and all this, including the fact that some guy left with 99% of their armaments that morning to drive down here to Austin to do a gun show and sell guns right there in broad daylight in public in front of everyone at his legitimate gun business. And once you know that part of the story, doesn't that change the entire story? That it's now you can't even pretend for a minute to entertain the idea that, oh yeah, these people were arming themselves up for some dangerous action, which the government did claim. They're like, oh, Koresh's mind control over these people. They could have marched on downtown Waco. He could have used them as a weapon to take over something or attack somebody, or this kind of thing is what they claimed. But geez, that's funny because he told his buddy Paul, "Okay, Paul, good luck out there selling guns and making money today, buddy," as his buddy Paul drove away with all of their guns, almost all of their guns that morning. And it's just amazing to me that nobody ever really dwells on that. But to me, that's like the crux of the whole thing. That changes the whole thing from, you might as well change like which police agency did the raid or whether it was night or day or snowing or not or something. Like, it's an entirely different story with this guy leaving with all the guns that morning,
Yeah, well, this is something that's gotten very little focus by most of the Waco commentators.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because I just think, to me anyway, it just seems like it's just the crux of the thing. It just shouts their innocence right off the bat there. On one hand, they're arming up for Armageddon. On the other hand, clearly they're not. I don't know.
Well, there were so many farcical elements in the federal storyline, especially after the shit hit the fan with the initial raid, and you got 4 dead ATF agents, and you got to find scapegoats real fast. And there was
and go back to that, by the way, because that was the original question way back when, was about who fired first, because it does matter a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the telltale thing on that was that the feds said that the Davidians fired first. ATF claimed that they had a video proving that. Too bad that video somehow vanished into the ether. So, but what happened was that the ATF agents, according to I think at least one, if not 2 or 3 of their testimony, the shooting started when they pulled up and killed the Branch Davidians' dogs prior to assaulting the building. And, you go and you shoot a Texan's dog, it's not a good idea. So, I mean, I was raised in the mountains of Virginia. You go around shooting people's dogs, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So, that was one storyline of how the shooting started. Another one is that the ATF fabricated a drug nexus, claiming the Davidians had a meth lab in their basement, and used that to get military equipment and assistance for their attack on the Davidians. And the ATF used a National Guard helicopter. According to some of the Davidians, that helicopter was passing over the Davidians' house and firing into it.
And they think that those might have been the first shots that were fired?
I've heard different things from different folks. Okay. So I think you might find a better source on this than me.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, we know for a fact that they did fire from their M16s from those Huey helicopters, at least at some point. And in fact, that I believe it's a fact that 3 of the 6 dead Davidians were killed by helicopters. Winston Blake was inside, and I'm sorry, I always forget their names, but there was the guy in the water tower, and then there was a guy on the 3rd floor who possibly was trying to shoot at the helicopters, that they killed him. And the lawyers, Dick DeGuerin. Oh no, it wasn't Dick DeGuerin. I just reread this in your thing. It was the other lawyer whose name escapes me. Talked about, he was a Marine and he saw all the incoming bullet holes in the ceiling and in the front door, and he knew because he was a Marine in the war, and I think in Vietnam. And I was like, I'm telling you, that was incoming, fire rounds there. You could see.
It's just too bad that they lost the door.
I know. I'm sure they tried their best. And look, I honestly don't think it's hyperbolic to suspect that that's why they burned the house down. It's because the house itself was Defense Exhibit A. And once they knew that Koresh was ready to, write down his final version of the 7 Seals and all this stuff, they decided that they weren't going to wait for that and let that happen. They were going to go ahead and make their move then and destroy the place so that the people wouldn't be able to prove that they were defending themselves.
I don't know. I mean, you mentioned there were several new books out on Waco. I haven't looked at them yet, but I hope more truth can come out on this.
Yeah, me too. All right, so one of the things that you wrote about, what time is it? We still got a little time. Tell me about, this is something that I guess I could have thought of, but it never did occur to me. But this is a whole thing that you had details on, was that during the time of the fire on the last day there, they obviously had all these recording devices in there. And of course, we've heard the clips of somebody saying, okay, pour it, which is evidently them talking about a Molotov cocktail at 6 o'clock in the morning, taken out of context. But then you talked about how they admitted that they edited those tapes, and to a significant degrees. Do you remember about that?
No.
All right. Well, I just read it on your site, so I'll tell you. What you wrote was that they admitted that they edited out all the sounds of the children screaming for their moms as they were killed. The Times reported that Mike DeGuerin demonstrated that 100 hours had been reduced to 1 hour, and part of it was people praying and children calling for their parents. I said screaming. Well, that's not right.
Yeah, there was so much evidence that the feds covered up after the April 19th fire caused by the FBI. And there were audio tapes. And back in May 1995, Attorney General Janet Reno was trying to whitewash the FBI by Janet Reno claimed there were words that were tape recorded while they were spreading the fuels to ignite the fire. The Branch Davidians' words were captured on tape. However, there were a lot of controversies about those audio tapes from inside the compound from the federal listening devices. At the trial in 1994, federal prosecutors put out a transcript that they said was from the electronic listening devices inside the compound, claiming that it showed a Davidian suicide scheme. But the defense attorneys challenged that, and the government's audio expert admitted that he had altered the transcripts after meeting with Justice Department officials. New York Times reported the Davidians' lawyer showed that more than 100 hours of FBI tapes from the compound had been reduced to a single hour of excerpts by the audio expert for the prosecution. And this defense lawyer says what we didn't hear today was from the transcripts, such as people praying as the tanks were bashing in their homes, or children calling out for their parents as the FBI was crushing their house.
Yeah. Give me just a minute here. At the Libertarian Institute, we publish books, real good ones. So far, we've got Will Grigg's No Quarter, Sheldon Richman's Coming to Palestine, and What Social Animals Owe to Each Other, and 4 of mine, Fool's Errand, Enough Already, The Great Ron Paul, and my brand new one, Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And I'm happy to announce that we've just published our managing editor Keith Knight's first one, The Voluntarist Handbook, an excellent collection of essays by the world's greatest libertarian thinkers and writers, including me. Check them all out at libertarianinstitute.org/books. And for a limited time, signed copies of Enough Already and Hotter Than the Sun are available at scotthorton.org/books. Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up. Well, no wonder they edited that out. Just like it's in the rules of engagement that they sent in camcorders and said, here, tape yourselves being crazy Jim Jones, Heaven's Gate lunatics so we could put you on TV. And so they all filmed each other, and then they sent the tapes out, and the FBI buried them, because if they put them on TV, then people would have seen that, hey, wait a minute, these people aren't crazy Heaven's Gate lunatics at all. They're regular people. Why are we doing this? So They covered that up too. And of course, they didn't want tapes getting out of the children calling for their parents as they're being killed by the FBI tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles. But same damn difference if you're a civilian on the receiving end of one of them. That's for sure. I mean, they're tracked vehicles with guns on them. And anyway, so what is this dang clock? Okay, good. We're doing okay. So can we talk about the origins of the fires here? Because you really develop, not conclusions, but definitely possibilities and reasons to suspect. One thing that I didn't realize, Jim, was that, as you wrote here, that they had admitted that they had thrown in flashbang grenades on April the 19th. And I knew that Hardy and McNulty had found those flashbang grenades in the evidence lockers where they had been mislabeled as silencers. But I did not realize, that's an important footnote for keeping, that they had admitted they had thrown in flashbangs. But don't worry, they said, Jim, that the CS gas is not flammable, right?
Yep. Well, and it's important because a crux of the FBI self absolution was that the flashbangs, as you said, were not flammable. And it was not until Mike McNulty in 1999, going through the evidence locker held by the Texas Rangers, found pyrotechnic devices the FBI had fired at the Davidians' home on April 19th during the assault. And that caused such an uproar that it forced Janet Reno to appoint a special counsel who was a bootlicker, but that's another story. So there were all kinds of things which came out, and it's interesting looking at the details of the FBI assault. There were a lot of warning details on the CS gas that was used. It was not used. It was not allowed for indoor use. It had been there were a number of Palestinians had been killed when the Israelis in the occupied territories had used it to suppress protests, and I think shooting inside of houses where people passed away. But there were all these warnings from Dow Chemical. You aren't supposed to use this in closed circumstances. There were experts who warned that there were very few studies indicating that this was safe. But it's interesting that the FBI portrayed itself as an innocent victim after the fire broke out, but it was the FBI plan all along to destroy the building, where there were 80 or more civilians, 90 women, children, men, and it wasn't like it was by accident. And prior to the fires breaking out, the FBI had collapsed 20% of the building. They were well on their way. Yet, the FBI kept broadcasting throughout the day on loudspeakers, "This is not an assault." I think David Hardy did a book by that title. So,
yeah, man. And, it's interesting. I didn't realize this. I knew that it was banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention, CS gas.
yep.
But I didn't realize that was signed by President Bush 1 week before Bill Clinton was sworn in to replace him in January of 1993. And
I didn't realize that either.
Yeah, I guess, it would be against the law for America to use them against Iraqis, but they can use them against Texans.
Yeah, there's a lot of loopholes in the in international arms treaties that let governments use weapons on their own people that they could not use in a foreign war.
Yeah, of course.
It's a paradox.
Yeah. Well, you got to test these things out on somebody,
And it was part of what was fascinating to me was to see how the FBI, how the Clinton administration, FBI, Attorney General Reno, how they, came up with storylines that always made the government look like it was an innocent victim. Oh, all these people killed themselves, wasn't our fault. There were congressional hearings, July 1995. Janet Reno testified on the last day. She was pressured about why she had unauthorized using these 54-ton tanks that smashed into the Branch Davidians' home. And Janet Reno said that she didn't think of them as a military vehicle. They were instead just like a good rent-a-car. And it's fascinating that she would say that. That shows her thinking. That shows the thinking of federal law enforcement. But there was no media reaction to her comment, except for my article the next day in the Wall Street Journal, which is like, "What in holy hades is this?" Yep. I think I suggested using the tank rent-a-car in the headline, but they said no, we don't need to do that. So,
yeah,
but
I remember when Rules of Engagement debuted, we went and saw it at the Dobie Theater Mall, Dobie Mall Theater, if I could speak English. We went and saw it at the Dobie Mall Theater in 1997, and at that clip, I remember the crowd was just gasped. It's just unbelievable. And she even does this weird thing where she goes. And this weird kind of thing with her throat after she says it, where it's just extra disgusting. Just, what are you talking about, lady? You're talking about, and in fact, the guy says, "You're talking about a tank knocking down a house full of people," and she goes, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah, there was a moment earlier in her testimony. The FBI and Justice Department tried to exonerate themselves for using the CS gas. Inside the home of the Davidians. They were saying, well, the people in there had gas masks, so, I assume that they were fine. But there weren't gas masks that would have fit young children. And someone brought one of the gas masks and put it on the table, her witness table next to her, and she just brushed it off and let it fall on the floor. So it's like, it was like she had had so much smoke blown up her butt at that point that she thought she was justice incarnate.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the point too, right? She's some idiot. She didn't know. And these FBI agents are telling her what, and she's going, "Okay, if you guys say so." And of course, that makes no sense, right? Like, "Oh, don't worry, they all have gas masks." Well, then how is this supposed to work then? They all have gas masks. And the whole point is that the poison gas is going to make them uncomfortable and want to seek fresh air, supposedly. Something like that, they said. If they could escape, from the collapsed building all around them and on top of them.
One damn paradox after another.
I'll tell you. And listen, you also pointed out something that I don't think I'd ever heard this, Jim, before, that Janet Reno had changed her excuse for the raid.
Oh, yes. This is huge. This is frickin' huge. So at the time that of the final federal assault at Waco, feds were saying, well, they had this excuse and they had that excuse. Flash forward 2 years later, after the Oklahoma City bombing, and after there was more pressure on the Justice Department to provide answers, Janet Reno gave a speech in front of a bunch of federal prosecutors, and she announced that the first and foremost reason for that final FBI assault was that law enforcement agents on the ground concluded that the perimeter had become unstable and posed a risk that individuals sympathetic to Koresh were threatening to take matters in their own hands and basically attack the federal agents from all sides. There was no evidence of this. She was just pulling that out of her ear, and it was completely brazen that she would say that. But like everything else that she made up, she got away with it.
Mm-hmm. And it's such an obvious lie, because obviously they would just arrest anybody that they thought was, the Michigan militia was going to come down there and go to war? Come on.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and this was the same speech in which Janet Reno, talking to federal prosecutors, was very emphatic that it is unfair, it is unreasonable, it is a lie to spread the poison that the government was responsible at Waco for the murder of innocents. This was their pushback in 1995, absolute total self-exoneration.
Right. Yeah, and, acting all moralistic about it, too, that how dare you go so far as to say otherwise. Well, geez, I've seen the FBI's own forward-looking infrared footage of them massacring these people. And if they want to argue that that's not FBI hostage rescue team agents in that footage, then they can only argue that it's Delta Force Combat Applications Group Team B instead. And it's most likely a mixture of the two, but there's no question that you can see men get out of the tanks and fire machine guns at the house as it's burning down. Guilty.
Well, yes.
I mean, what can you say? There's no other explanation. I mean, if it was just a flash, that'd be one thing. But this is flashes on the ends of machine guns being held by men who just got out of a tank. So, yeah. So that's muzzle flashes from a machine gun, But so now I wonder, in your coverage back then, did you delve very deep into the presence of the Delta Force on April the 19th and their role there, or even before that?
No, I mean, I was part of, I heard the allegations. I was chasing so many other rabbits at that point. Waco was on my radar screen, but there was Ruby Ridge. There was, 20 or 30 different excerpts from Lost Rights I was pushing to Playboy and a lot of other places.
Sure.
So I didn't do the in-depth investigation into Waco that people like Mike McNulty did. So, but I was happy to write about what they found.
Sure. Well, and you did plenty of your own, if not real gumshoe stuff, at least collecting footnotes and clips and admissions and major points, as I've brought up on the show already here, quite a few that I didn't know about before. So, you're always doing great work, if nothing else, on the second hand, scooping up all the stuff that matters the very most,
Yeah, well, part of what I was doing back then, and still do now, is pay attention to the words of the government, because there was that Janet Reno speech I had a couple quotes from on May 5th, 1995. I don't think that ever hit the newspapers, but I was able to get a transcript of it, and all of a sudden it's a whole different way to frame Waco. There were a lot of comments that federal officials made from 93 onwards that if you take that and juxtapose those quotes with what later came out, then it's jaw-dropping to see the amount of federal falsehoods. And I was seeking first to find out what the government did, and second to stop people from being so deferential to the latest federal storyline, because how many times can the government change its storyline on Waco and still be credible?
Yeah, seriously. Well, and this is something that we were talking about at the beginning there about their credibility, that people really did believe in this stuff at the time. And, I want to get to the
You didn't
trial.
believe it, did you?
No, I sure didn't. And in fact, because
I
I'm a
didn't believe it.
skateboarder, so the first time I ever met a cop in the wild, I was cured of any respect for any government employees ever for the rest of my life. That's it. Vendetta forever. So I remember, you talked about, you remember the day of the first raid. I do too. I remember watching on TV, and I think the first thing I saw was they were on the roof trying to get in that window. And you know how you see you're driving, you see a plastic bag floating by out of your peripheral vision, and you're not sure if it's a cat or what at first, kind of. So my very first thing's like, I thought I was looking at a hotel, and it's like the second floor, but outside balcony, kind of outside the doors, something like that, like a little motel type thing. And like, no, that's not quite right. And then the TVs explain this is a church that the cops are raiding here. And of course, they're all dressed up like soldiers and all that. So, I remember being pretty impressed about their brutality right then. And then the day they were burning it, I was with my friend John, and we went to his house, and we go in the front door, and his mom goes, "Look, they're burning it. They're burning it." And I go, "Who's burning it?" And she goes, "Well, the TV says they're burning it." And I go, "Bullshit, man. They'll never show us the back of that house. Those cops are killing those people, man. They're sick of this shit, and they're just killing them." And she's like, "Yeah, I guess you're probably right." And I just always felt that way from that moment on. There's and of course, all the evidence came out. Again, the forward-looking infrared footage proves it. It just proves beyond any doubt of what is happening there. Those aren't Branch Davidians getting out of those Bradleys and shooting their fellow churchgoers there. Those are cops or soldiers that are doing that. And so, yeah, that is, always the way I felt about it. But, I've told this story a lot of times, but I think it's important that the housewives of Northwest Austin, Texas wanted those people dead. My job was sacking groceries at the Albertsons at that time. And the consensus was, he said he was Jesus, let's nail him to a tree. And if there's a bunch of women and children in our way, then tough. I say go in there and end it. That's what they would all say. Go in there and end it. Go in there and end it. Again, with this Mina Bird stuff. Secret evidence that we haven't seen yet, but it must be there. Go in there and end it. Go in there and end it. But that means machine gun the people, And these are Texans. These people are 100 miles up the road. But they're a foreign nation. They're Iraqis, dude. You could have dropped a nuke on them. And the housewives of Northwest Austin would have been happy with that. And people nowadays try to pretend that, oh, no, all right-wingers were good on it. It was just the Democrats that weren't. That's not true. Right-wingers were all on the cops' side. You'd have had to been part of the Patriot movement or the conspiracist right or the militia movement or the Libertarians to be good on this. G. Gordon Liddy talked a little bit of smack, but overall, Rush Limbaugh and
Rush
the
Limbaugh
Titans of radio, they were bad on this. They were pro-cop.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh is a perfect example here because when Janet Reno testified on Capitol Hill just after the final assault, all the dead people, senators lined up to kiss her boots. They wanted to be photographed with her. Pretty much the same in the House, except for Congressman John Conyers, Democrat out of Michigan, I think Detroit area. And Conyers just hammered Reno for what she had done. And Reno broke down in tears. And
really?
Rush Limbaugh responded by beating up John Conyers.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? Because he's actually horrible in the movie. In Waco, the Rules of Engagement.
That's interesting. He was probably not good in the 1995 hearings, but there was maybe an appropriations hearing late April, early May 1993, in which Conyers, smacked Janet Reno around for the use of deadly force against civilians, and she broke down in tears. And Rush Limbaugh jumped on Conyers. Other people jumped on Conyers. It was Conyers' finest hour, and he's someone who he's someone who was, I think, an opponent of the Patriot Act and said some good things, but he also signed off a lot of very bad federal policies. But anyhow,
yeah. Well, to the point about the conservative right, that they were just thin blue line on this. The cult of law enforcement is powerful. And those Branch Davidians, they had thumbed their nose at lawful authority. You think you're higher than the red, white, and blue? How dare you? And that means we'll kill all your kids too. We'll kill everybody. You're not allowed to get away with this, and certainly not at the expense of days of our lives and The Price is Right.
Well, it's interesting. There was a split among conservatives. The American Spectator was very critical of Waco, I think, from the start. I think National Review was pro-government on that. There was one line which, looking at that, my piece I did for Wall Street Journal, May of '95, Waco must get a hearing. The last line of that was, "The ghosts of Waco will continue to haunt the U.S. government until the truth is told about what the government did and why." And those ghosts of Waco are still haunting the U.S. government.
Yeah, you got that right. Well, and they're going to, even after all the truth is out, because it just shows how guilty they are. And it ain't like they said they were sorry or anything. They still lie about it to this day. And, I guess I haven't looked very close at this, but I've been told that there are 3 new books out that all say, "Oh, isn't this an unfortunate series of some mistakes were made?" Yeah. We're not going to let them get away with that. You can't spin, regardless of exactly how the fire started, which I don't think anyone knows exactly for sure, although there's certainly reason to believe, as we talked about those flashbangs and the CS gas, that it was the government that started that fire, whether deliberately or not. But you just can't spin the machine gun fire from the men that get out of the tanks. There's just no way to make that go away. That was either the hostage rescue team or it was the Delta Force, or both. And there are 2 witnesses in the second movie, New Revelation there, Gene Cullen, a CIA officer, and Stephen Barry, a former Special Forces guy from the Army, who says that they were both told firsthand, and it's hearsay, but sustained. I'll allow it, as they say. They both say that they were told personally by members of Delta Force Team B that they participated in a firefight. Those are the words of Cullen, and then pulling triggers was the way Stephen Barry put it. And I think in both cases, very credibly, that's what they told me, all right. And that goes to show that it wasn't just Reno. And Bill Clinton later admitted this. And I have somewhere the Fox News clip from Tony Snow or Britt Hume maybe doing the news, where Bill Clinton, in a deposition where he's being, I'm pretty sure it was a Judicial Watch deposition about his relationship with James Riotti, admitted that, one, he watched Waco burn with James Riotti, his Chinese intelligence connection, financier, and that, yes, he gave the final approval to Janet Reno to go ahead, which was something that had always been omitted from the story before. They made it sound like it was all her. And at the end of his presidency, he admitted that she came to him or the FBI came to him, and he's the one who gave the order. And of course, he's the only one who could have ordered the Delta Force. I mean, they could have ordered themselves, I guess. But if they were operating under anyone's authority, it wasn't Janet Reno's.
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to your upcoming podcast on Waco, talking to Dan Gifford and stuff like that. I'm sure you'll have a lot of great stuff and some new information.
Yep, there's going to be some stuff in there, that's for sure. Now, to wrap up here, Jim, and we don't have too much time, and I know it's a bit complicated, but I was wondering if you could take us through a little bit of what happened at this trial and the screwy way these people were acquitted, but then half convicted anyway, and what in the hell happened with that?
Well, it was a typical federal court trial where you had a federal judge who blocked the defense attorneys from introducing a lot of the evidence of government misconduct. I think he came out and said that the government's not on trial here. And once you have that storyline, when there's been a lot of government violence, a lot of dead bodies, it's basically letting the government skip blame free. But the jury verdict, the feds were hoping for a lot of murder convictions. The jury threw that back in their face, and the federal prosecutors, the lead prosecutor, burst out in tears when the jury verdict was read, because it was far less punitive than what the feds had hoped for. The news media had headlines that the government lost the case. but there was some murky stuff in the jury verdict, and you had Judge Walter Smith come back and twist the verdicts and slapped on a bunch of additional prison sentences that would not have been justified by any reasonable interpretation of the jury verdict. So that was bad faith by the judge, but he'd shown bad faith throughout the trial.
Yeah. Man, it's something else. All right, look, it's 30 years ago, but for some reason it just won't go away, this Waco thing. And as you said there, it's because there's no accountability. There's no honesty. You could take a class, a psychology class or a history class or a Texas government class, and you could learn all about how those people killed themselves.
Scott,
I learned that in junior college, that it was a crazy cult, just like Charles Manson and just like Jim Jones. And that's all you need to know.
Wow. Well, there's a lot of, this is still a very important issue, and I really appreciate how you're keeping Waco on the radar screen, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming work you have on it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you so much for participating with me here and all your great work on this issue over the years, man. It means a lot.
Thanks so much.
All right, you guys, that's the great Jim Bovard. He's at jimbovard.com, and his latest book is Public Policy Hooligan. You'll love it.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.